All right. Thank you, John. All right. I don't think we've missed anybody. With that, we'll introduce our speaker today. I'd like to introduce Larry Elias. Larry, I very much appreciate you speaking to our group today, and I'm excited about your remarks. I've known Larry for quite a while. We go to the same church, Messiah Lutheran here in Lincoln, and I also had dealings with Larry when he worked for B&R Stores here in Lincoln, and I'm sure he'll probably touch on that today. I was part of a company that used to do a mystery shopping program for B&R Stores. So, Larry, thank you for being here with us today, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you, Steve, for asking me to be part of your group today, and welcome everybody. And thank you for allowing me to speak with you for a while today. You've probably, if you're like me, you've been on a lot of Zoom presentations and meetings over the past several months, and sometimes we get Zoom fatigue from that. You know, it's kind of hard to engage. It's for someone who, like me, who uses lots of movement and hand expressions. I can't walk around, or I'll go off camera, and I can move my hands, and you can't see it unless I put them right in front of me. So that's kind of weird. And then in the audience today, I have a good friend, and I have my wife, so there's a lot of pressure there. And then I found out that someone who knows my son is on today, so there's additional pressure. But anyway, thank you for inviting me today, and I'm going to spend most of my time today just sharing with you some things I've learned in my experience in my career. I'm going to talk a little bit about my career, what I do now, and what I've done, but I want to spend the majority of the time talking about what I've learned along the way, and I hope those experiences can be of benefit to you and your organization. And I'll be happy to have more discussion afterwards or answer your questions as well. So with that, I'll tell you a little bit about my background. I'm a fourth generation grocer. I have spent roughly the first half of my life in Iowa and the last half of my life in Nebraska, with about 3 years of Colorado squeezed in between. My great-grandfather, around the turn of the 20th century, came to the United States from the Middle East, immigrated here, ended up in Omaha, and he was a peddler. He had a peddler's wagon and a horse, and he went from town to town and farm to farm and sold just general supplies and household goods, and did that and started a family in Omaha. And then in 1926, he moved to a small town in western Iowa called Persia, started a general store, and he died. I was born the same year he died, so I never got to meet him, but I worked in that store with my dad and with my grandfather, and that's how I got started in the business. And I just was never smart enough to figure out what else to do, and so I've just stayed in the supermarket industry my whole life. When I got out of college, I went to work for a Fortune 500 wholesaler and retailer. Spent about 20 years there. And they transferred me around a little bit, ended up in Lincoln. And after I left them, I worked for B&R Stores, as Steve mentioned, independent supermarket operator based in Lincoln, and spent a little over 15 years with them. In addition to the supermarket industry, I have a real love and appreciation for the agriculture industry. My wife was born and raised and grew up on a farm. My mom grew up on a farm. I have a lot of brother-in-laws and relatives that farm. And I just have a great appreciation and love for what our ag producers and farmers and ranchers do, and what they have to deal with to bring food to the table of people in America and around the world. And so I stay engaged and apprised on what's happening in the ag industry as well. I'm a consultant now. Larry Elias Consulting is the name of my company, and I decided about 3 years ago to put my experience to work in helping other people, and also to allow more flexibility in my life. My wife and I have 3 grown children, and they're all married, and we have 5 grandchildren. and I enjoy the time that we can to spend with them. So I decided to start my own consulting company. And in addition to consulting, I'm a speaker and a coach. I work mostly with retailers, but not always. I help the organizations that I work with in the areas of strategy development, operations, marketing, merchandising, and leadership development. And that's an area that I really like to focus on. Leadership is critically important, and in our world, not just in organizations, but in our nation, in our community, and in all areas. And John Maxwell says that everything rises and falls on leadership, and that's absolutely true. Good leadership helps achieve good things, and poor leadership results in lots of other, challenges. And so I focus a lot on leadership development and personnel development. And that's really been an important part of my career and in working with others. I'm also a volunteer, and I volunteer with Junior Achievement of Lincoln. I really believe in Junior Achievement's mission of teaching young people workplace readiness and financial literacy and entrepreneurship. I'm a classroom volunteer at Lincoln East High School. I've been a volunteer for about 10 years. I serve on the board of directors at JA, and I'm also past chair. And I'm a volunteer with Royal Family Kids. Royal Family is a national organization, has a local chapter in Lincoln, and they work with abused and neglected children in helping confront abuse. We have a camp for children every year in southeast Nebraska, and I've been a volunteer at that camp. And they also have a mentoring program for children that have been abused and neglected, primarily kids that are in the foster system. And as Steve mentioned, I go to Messiah Lutheran Church, and I'm the chair of the lay leadership board there, and I'm involved in men's ministry and several other ministries, small group leader and so forth. And so I spend a little bit of time there, and I enjoy mentoring. My kids, kind of in a deliberate way, I like to continue to spend time individually with my 3 kids, and if they're willing to do that. And I'm also mentoring a young man right now who had kind of a tough life growing up, and I try to get together with him on a regular basis, and I find that really is beneficial for me, almost probably as much as it is for him. So that's a little bit about my background and what I do. I'd really like to spend the rest of the time telling you a little bit about some of the things I've learned along the way. And I could go on and on. I like to tell stories, and I could probably tell you hundreds of them, but I'm going to share maybe a half dozen things this morning. And the first one, the one I'll start with, is find your purpose. And, I think that most people don't give as much thought to their purpose as they should. I think it's easy for us to grow up in a place where our parents determine where we go to school and kind of the first part of our lives. And then we go to school, and the first big decision we have is if we go to college or if we go to a trade school or if we get a job, and what we're going to do and what we're going to major in. And then you get a job, and you maybe get married and start a family, and you find yourself living your life, and you're doing good things, but you're not necessarily giving thought to what your purpose is. And I think it's important that we go through our lives with direction and not just go through life. And regardless of your age, we can always ask ourselves the question about purpose. And even if we are at a point where we think we really haven't figured out our purpose, it's not too late to do that. And some people maybe have a general idea of their purpose, but they've never put it down in writing. And I think that's important. I think it's important for you to have a purpose that you've stated and that you can put in writing. So how do you do that? How do you find your purpose? Well, I could spend a whole time today talking about that, but I'll just say a couple of things. One is, ask yourself some questions. What brings you joy? What makes you weep? And when you ask yourself those questions, you start to understand the things that are important to you, the things that you want to be a part of, the things that you want to maybe help bring change to or bring an end to. And that can help you determine your purpose. If you want to read a good book about purpose, there's a book by John Maxwell called Intentional Living. And it's a great book, and it really talks a lot about how living with intent and purpose makes your life better and makes better for the people that you live around. Another book that I read many years ago when I was in a management development program with one of my companies was actually a time management book, and it was called How to Get Control of Your Time and Your Life by Alan Lakin. And it's a time management book, but it really surprised me because it went far beyond what I considered time management. You know, you think of time management and you think of things like getting organized and setting priorities. But this book asks the question, what is the best use of your time right now? And the kind of the underlying theme of the book was that if you waste your time, you waste your life. And the author, after you read the first chapter, requires you to go through an exercise where you write down your A, B, and C goals. And after you've done that, then he says, okay, now just focus on your A goals and classify those as maybe like AA or AAA or A, like what's really important. And what you're doing is you're going through an exercise and really determining what is most important to you. And then he tells you when you're done with that, okay, now just take your B and C goals and set them aside. Don't really give much thought to those. The book really comes from the premise of determining what's most important, because if you're spending your time on anything other than what's really important, you're wasting your time. And that's not to say that there aren't other things that we do, that we don't spend all of our time with just one singular thing. But the point is, it can be so easy for us to get distracted. You know, how many times do you find yourself checking your email or doing something that's not of high value, but it takes up your time? And we can so easily take up a lot of our time on things that aren't that important. The next thing I want to talk about is there's a cost to being right. And if being right is important to you, then you have to be prepared to pay that cost. And that could be, the cost could be a job. Being right could cost you a job. Being right could cost you a client. It could cost you a friendship or a relationship. It could even cost you your marriage. There's a saying that goes, an insult is written in sand, but to the recipient, it is chiseled in bronze. And, you know, if I say something or do something that hurts someone else's feelings, I might not even give it another thought later that day or the next day, but to them, it may have a significant impact. And so being right is really about pride. It's really about how you see yourself and how you see other people. Is your life about you, or is it about others? The poet John Holmes said that the entire universe, with one trifling exception, is composed of others. But yet it is so easy for us to make ourselves the center of our universe, and everything revolves around us and our feelings and what we think. And when we think of ourselves that way, we have a tendency to want to get the last word, to want to be right. That's important to us. And that can damage things. I'll share a story with you that really kind of shows this. There were two young boys going to their first baseball practice when they were little, 6 or 7 years old, little league, first practice. And they were friends, and their two dads were the coaches. And so they were getting ready to have infield, and the boys were on the infield, and there were a number of boys there, so they had to take turns at each of the bases. And the two boys were at third base. And so the one little boy is ready to field the ball and throw it to first base to take infield practice. And his dad was the one that was hitting the ball. And the dad says, okay, I'm going to hit it and throw it down to first base. And so the dad hits the ball, and man, it's a burner. I mean, he hits it hard. And the little boy sees that ball coming, and he steps off to the side. He's thinking, I'm not going to try and catch that ball. That's coming way too fast. And he steps out of the way, and guess what happens? The ball hits the other little boy right in the stomach, and he just keels over on the ground, writhing in pain, out of breath. And the two dads run down to third base, and the dad of the little boy laying on the ground points at the first little boy and says, "Why did you do that? What the is wrong with you?" Ripping into that little kid because he wouldn't catch the ball while his son is writhing in pain. And the father of the first little boy, the one who didn't catch the ball, who stepped aside, got down on his hands and knees to tend to that little other man's little boy to see if he was okay. And that story is a story of really the difference between wanting to be right, wanting to place blame, and really being a concerning person that cares about others. And that's a true story. And I'm the little boy that stepped aside and let the ball hit my friend. And my dad was the guy that hit the ball, and he's the one that tended to the friend. And that was the kind of example that he made an early impression on my life about, what was important. What was important was my friend who was laying on the ground in pain because of what I had done. The next thing I want to talk about is nearly everything significant in my life came from difficulty. Either something I didn't want to do or a hard-earned lesson. There are a lot of things that we don't want to do. And this if you've ever trained for a team or an athletic event or a marathon. You don't want to get up in the morning. You don't want to go out for that run. You don't want to change your diet. You don't want to go through the discipline of, what you need to do to get to be successful. We have uphill dreams, but downhill habits. We want what's up the top of the hill, but we'd rather coast than climb the hill to get there. And it's like if you start a business venture, and so many of you know this, faith is easy to have at the beginning and at the end of everything. When you're first starting out, you're confident, and when you've achieved it, it's great. But in the middle, you go through a lot of tough things, and it's hard, and we have to go through things that create difficulty. When I got out of college and I started with my first company, I was in a training program, and when I got done with the training program, I was an assistant store manager, and the first store I went to was a disaster. I mean, the inmates were running the asylum. Everybody did what they wanted to do. It was a mess. It was stressful. The store manager was new there, and he was really good. And he just said to me, "This is going to be tough, but we're going to make it happen." And it was tough. It was a disaster. We went through a lot of people. We had to train people. Some didn't want to be trained. We had to hire a lot of people. We had to let people go. But when we were done, that store was the shining jewel of our division in terms of productivity and profitability and day-to-day store conditions. And it took difficulty to get there. And that was a great team that I was a part of, but only because we had to work hard to get there. And when you talk about hard work, I like to tell a story about Gary Player, who was one of the greatest golfers that ever lived. And I had a chance to see him play once in Hawaii. And Gary Player was not the most personable guy in the world. And one time a fan came up to him and said, "Oh, I'd give anything to hit the ball like you." And Gary was in one of those moods where he said, "No, you wouldn't. Would you get up in the morning and go out and pick one club and hit that club 1,000 times to practice your swing? And then after your hand's bleeding, you wrap a towel around your hand and then go back and hit the ball 1,000 more times?" He said, "If you would do that, then you would hit the ball like me." And so sometimes it's easy for us to say things like that, but do we really mean them? Are we willing to put in the work? Brock, you talked about my son, and my son a couple of years ago made a statement to me that really kind of hit home with this point. He said to me, "The harder I work, the luckier I get." And he understands that it takes hard work and difficulty and doing things that maybe you don't want to do to achieve your goals. And then I mentioned that, a lot of those significant things come from difficulty, just trials that you go through. It's maybe not just hard work, but some of the mistakes you've made or the trials that you have to go through. We've all had bad things happen in our life, and sometimes we cause those things to happen, and sometimes they're not our fault. And the big person learns from all of those things. The small person sees himself or herself as a victim. And the key is what we do with those things and how we react to them. Another true story. When I was 8 years old, me and some other boys in my neighborhood were kind of up to mischief. There were some girls in the neighborhood, and one of them was visiting her grandparents from another town, and I threw a mud ball at her, and I missed her, and I hit the window on the house of her grandparents and broke the window. I didn't know it at the time, and I went down to my dad's grocery store, and he got a phone call from that little girl's grandparents, and he found out that I had broken that window, and he said, "You're going to pay for that." And I'm 8 years old or 7 years old. I didn't have any money, and I didn't get an allowance. And I said, "How am I going to do that?" And he said, "Well, you're going to start working for me." And I had kind of worked around my dad's store a little bit when I was a kid, but not really seriously. So this is when I went to work. So when I say when I tell people I've had a 50+ year career, that I started when I was 7. And he said, "You're going to work for me." And I said, "How are you going to pay me?" And he said, "Well, I'm going to pay you a nickel for every small job you do, and I'm going to pay you a dime for every big job." Like, a big job is like rebagging a 100-pound sack of potatoes into tote bags, and a small job would be like sweeping the back room floor. So I went to work, and I was really shook up and sorry that I had broken that window, and I wanted to make sure that I could pay for it. And so I went to work that day. And at the end of the day, we added up all the things that I had done, and it came to $1.85. And my dad decided that that was too much money. And so he recalibrated the pay system. So my first day of my first actual job was also the same. That was also the day I got my first pay cut. But nevertheless, that experience taught me to take responsibility, and it taught me a little bit about work ethic. I was proud to be able to get things done and to achieve things. And so I learned a lot from that. And you've probably heard the story about hot water. We think of hot water as if somebody's in hot water, that's like a bad thing. You've probably heard the story about hot water and the effect that it has on different substances in the carrot, the egg, and the coffee. If you put a carrot in hot water, it makes it soft, so you can eat it. If you put an egg in hot water, it makes it hard and turns it into a boiled egg. And some people like boiled eggs. If you put coffee in hot water, it makes a wonderful beverage. And this is Perk Up Thursday, right? So we've all got our coffee, and I get to look at your mug later, right? So, the real key is what happens to you when you're in hot water. What do you do with that experience, and how can you make that a good thing? Next thing I want to talk about is what I think the key to happiness is, and that is being grateful. I never really gave that much thought until a few years ago. The key to happiness really is being grateful. It's about perspective. Do you focus on what you want or on what you have? Do you look at a glass as being half empty or half full? If we're never going to have enough to be happy, or we're never going to be enough to be happy. There's always more. And so if your happiness is based on what you want or what you want to be, you're always going to be able to look at more and say, I don't have that. My first job out of college, I mentioned I went to work for a grocery company, and I started as a trainee. I made $12,000 a year. And when I told my dad that, and that I think that calculated out to like $5.02 an hour. And when I told my dad that, I remember the expression that he had, the reaction he had was one of almost amazement. And I'm looking at my dad, who worked really hard in his business to make ends meet. And I almost felt bad because I was making so much money. I mean, that was a great job for me. That was good money out of college. And I was really happy about that. I was pleased. I was content. Right up until I found out that this 19-year-old kid that was working in the same department as me, in the produce department, I was training there for a few weeks, but he was a produce clerk. Right up until I found out that he was making $6.40 an hour. And he was 19, and he went to work in that grocery store when he was in high school and didn't go to college, and he was making like 25% more than I was. And I wasn't happy. And so I called up the human resource manager that hired me, and I let him know how I felt, and he set me straight. He basically said, "Were you happy with that pay when we offered you the job?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Okay, so what's the big deal? You know, you're in a training position. We're investing in you. We're giving you a great learning opportunity. You're only going to be a trainee for a few months, and then you're going to be an assistant store manager with an opportunity to continue to earn more responsibility." And he was right. And several months later, I was an assistant store manager. And then a year after that, I was a store manager, and I was making double what I had been making as a trainee. And so again, I was happy with something until I decided I wanted something more. I wasn't grateful with what I had. I wanted more, and that really robbed me of joy. And I think that that's an important thing for us to remember, to be grateful for what we have and start with that. And then finally, I never want to stop learning and improving. Think about the people that you may be around who don't want to learn. We all know those people. They might be your friends. They may be coworkers. They may be potential clients. You know, the people that don't want to learn, they're really what I call old. You know, maybe not in their actual age, but in their thinking. Henry Ford said that anyone who stops learning is old, whether at 20 or 80. And anyone who keeps learning stays young. And that's really true. You know, I like to be able to have conversations with my kids and my grandkids and other people about things that are of interest to them, because I want to learn those things. I want to continue to learn. People that don't want to learn are hard to be around. Sometimes they're arrogant. You know, it's like they think they know it all. Or maybe they just don't want to change. Maybe they're just not open to change. But learning is important. And again, it's about, you know, meeting the needs of others. You know, it's easy for us to see other people's faults, but it's not easy for us to see our own faults. And there's a quote by Carl Jung, and if you studied psychiatry or psychology, you've probably heard this, but Carl Jung was a famous psychiatrist, psychotherapist. And he said that until you make the unknown known, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. Or until you make the subconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. And I heard that for the first time a few years ago, and I got to thinking about that. And, you know, we all have a certain amount of emotional intelligence, you know, or kind of understanding about ourselves, self-awareness. You know, we try to understand how we come across to others and how they interpret us and how they take things. Some of us are maybe better at that than others. You know, you maybe you say a word and you wonder if you mispronounced it, you know, and you might, you know, that person that you're around and they don't have much self-awareness, right? They mispronounce a lot of words, or they act a certain way, and they don't seem to realize how other people respond to that or take that. But you know, it's obvious to me, it's obvious to you, but it's not obvious to them. And if you're one of those persons that maybe doesn't think you mispronounce any words, then you might be that person I'm talking about. But you know, we all can improve ourselves by learning more about ourselves. You see, if we don't understand ourselves, we don't understand how other people take us, how we come across to other people, that can affect our relationships. That can affect our job, or how our boss or our coworkers see us, or a client. And then we get down the road and we lose our job, or we don't get that client, and we think, man, it was fate. Life's just tough. I've had a lot of bad things happen to me in life. And you know what? We may have more control over that than we think. And so I think it's important for us to understand ourselves and be willing to change. And, everybody wants to change the world, but nobody wants to change himself. It's really easier for us to see the change that's needed somewhere else than it is within. Kind of an example for men and ladies too. But sometimes, we think as a husband and as a father, I would die for my wife. I would die for my family. If I had to, I would defend them. And when I hear that kind of talk, I say, that's great. But my question to you is, what are you willing to live for? What are you willing to change to live for your family or to live for, your spouse or whatever is important to you? It's a lot easier for us to talk about what we would do if we had to, fight for something than what we're willing to do on a day-to-day basis that might require some questions and some, honest answers and might require change. The hardest person you'll ever have to lead is yourself. And we talk about, managing people, and I've talked to people that say, I don't want to be involved in management or leadership because that's too hard and I don't want to deal with other people's problems. And yeah, there's some truth to that. But the hardest person you will ever have to lead is yourself. And chances are, most of the answers of the things that you need to do, but just implementing those can be extremely difficult. So with that, I'd like to thank you again for inviting me to be a part of your group today, and I'd be happy to answer your questions. I also will say to you that I have a website, Larry Elias Consulting. If you just check out Larry Elias Consulting, you can see my website. I also have a Facebook page for Larry Elias Consulting. And you'll also find me on LinkedIn, Larry Elias. And so check me out, send me a connection request. I'd be happy to network with you. And if you'd like to learn more about what I do, you can check out one of those resources.
Larry, thank you so much. That's some great wisdom you passed along. I particularly agree with your remarks about the need to keep learning no matter what age you are. I tell students that all the time. Just because you're wrapping up a degree here at Southeast, don't think you're done learning. With the pace of change seeming to accelerate all the time, I think it forces everybody to be constantly adding to their skill set if they want to remain relevant in the workforce. So great thoughts. Does anybody else have any questions for Larry?
I'll jump in with a question. So I really did appreciate that as well, the lifelong learning component side of things. And it seems like every New Year's I challenge myself with something new, of whether to read more books or whatever it might be. And it's always that challenge of juggling time and prioritizing, those right opportunities to learn. So do you have any good strategies for that, of, setting aside time to learn?
Well, a couple things maybe, Stan. Thanks for the question. One is, I would say, anything that you try for the first time or something that you haven't done in a while that you want to develop a discipline on, be patient and really push through for a period of time, 30 days to 6 weeks, because habits are an important part of our routine. We get into habits, good habits and bad habits. And Zig Ziglar used to talk about that, and he said that, you have to do something for like 6 weeks consistently before it really starts to get easier. And, whether that's reading, reading the Bible, exercise, changing your eating habits, it takes time. And so just be willing to know that it's going to take time before you start to feel or see the benefit from it. And then maybe one other thing I would suggest is, if it's something that requires brain power that you want to do, like say learning or reading, think about when you're at your best. Are you at your best in the morning? Are you at your best in the evening? And so you may want to adjust your schedule if you can, to try to, match what you're trying to do with when your brain or your body can do that. Some people want to start an exercise routine, and for them the best thing is doing it maybe right after work or in the afternoon. Other people, morning's the best thing. So whether it's working out or reading or whatever it might be, think about that time of day that you can do it when it would work best for you.
Other questions?
Larry, you knew I would ask a question.
I kind of figured that.
Just seriously, when you one of the first things you talked about, I made a note, when you opened you went to that first job in that first store, and you said it was the inmates were running the prison, and then you turned it around to make it one of the most successful stores. What are some of the things that you and your boss applied to make that happen?
Well, that's a great question. And when you're in the middle of that, it's just a disaster. And if you want to verify that, the next time you talk to Deb, just ask her, because I would always bring home the frustrations from work, right, and talk about them. I'll never forget one of the first things my boss said to me, because I couldn't believe how bad it was, how low the standards were of the people that I was trying to supervise and work with. And I had a conversation with him, and I actually thought maybe my standards are just too high. And he said to me, "Don't ever lower your standards." And when you don't lower your standards, you may have to increase your grace. You may have to increase your patience, and which I did. But it just took time. It was one person at a time. It was one day at a time. It was one project at a time. You used the term "turned it around." Well, it wasn't like a 180. It was like really slow. It was like turning a battleship around. It took a long time. But it just persistence and not lowering standards was really the key. And then you have to have a sense of humor. You're going to have some tough days, and you're going to be able to just remember, when you have those tough days, someday you're going to be able to look back at some of that and be able to laugh at it. And I could tell you stories for the rest of the morning about that store and some of the things I laugh at now that I didn't laugh about then.
Thanks.
Thanks for the question.
Anybody else with a question for Larry? If not, Larry, thank you so much again for your time today. I appreciate you joining us.
You're welcome.
We're going to have you now serve as our mug judge. So anybody that would like to be in the running for a Focus Suites Perk Up Thursday mug, hoist them up there, let Larry see him so that he can pick a winner. Boy, there's some good ones this week.
All right. I'm going to go with Chris Foreman. Let him win the mug. His mug looks kind of creative, but it looks like he's been using it for a while. And so maybe, Steve, you could send him one of your mugs.
Okay.
It's a pair of blue jeans.
Is that what it is?
Yeah. Can you see the pockets here?
Okay, I can now. That's cool. Well, you can add this one to your collection now.
Thank you.
All right. Chris Foreman is the winner this week. Again, thank you, everybody, for joining us. Please join us next week for Haley Ramsey with the Center for Rural Affairs. And I think she's the new director for the Women's Business Center in downtown Lincoln. And we have some other exciting speakers coming up, including the owner of the local Chick-fil-A restaurants. And so I would urge you to look for that one coming up. And thanks again for being here. I'm going to leave the room open here for a few minutes if you'd like to chat amongst each other or ask anybody else questions. I'll leave it open for about 5 minutes. So, Larry, thanks again for being here today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for the time. Thanks for the presentation there too. It's great talk. So thanks.
Thanks, Brock. Thanks for introducing yourself.
Absolutely.